the Confessions Podcast.
Simon, Joe and Bobby, I'm writing, by the way, this is just a prediction from me. No forgiveness.
Neither of us, really?
That's a challenge.
I'm writing to beg forgiveness for a prank that went drastically wrong around the summer of 2007. My wife is without doubt the biggest Harry Potter fan and has read the books on many occasions. And on the eve of the release of Deathly Hallows Part 2, my wife, myself and her 2 work friends from the store, where they all work, were out enjoying a few drinks. We'll call them Rosie and Jim. Well, Rosie and Jim were also a couple, and after several shandies, Jim told us he always used to play pranks on Rosie. Rosie is also a big reader, with Stephen King being her favourite author. So Jim thought it would be absolutely hilarious if he ripped out the back pages of Rosie's latest Stephen King novel when she wasn't looking. I mean, already, pranks to Jim, that's so unfunny. Anyway, as Jim told the story, I could see Rosie's face getting redder and redder, and my wife quickly voiced her disapproval. It was at this point the conversation took a bit of a dip, and not long after that we called it a night. My wife was up at 6 a.m, after all, to get the new Harry Potter book. The next morning came and my wife was as excited as I've ever seen her, bouncing around like a 5-year-old on Christmas morning. She dragged me along to the bookstore with her, and much to her delight, she was one of the first there. The smile was soon wiped off her face, though, when she saw the person at the till. It was old Jim, and as she took the book, she gave him what could only be described as a death stare. Anyway, we were soon back home, and my wife was completely engrossed in the book, reading 10 pages at a time, then going back and rereading the same 10 pages again so she didn't miss anything. She was so into this book that she soon forgot she had a family, and she forgot she had any friends. This book was her entire world. I think Mark's a little resentful. Around a week into the book, we had a party to go to, which I'd been looking forward to for some time, given that it was with friends and we hadn't seen them for ages. Well, we got there and all was going swimmingly, but soon my darling wife vanished into thin air, leaving the other couples and myself wondering, where on earth has she gone? After a couple of minutes of searching, I found her in the tree house out the back, reading the book, which by now was the only thing that seemed to matter to her. This caused an argument that was so bad we left the party and went home again. My darling wife went straight to bed and I was left on my own downstairs with a rather fantastic bottle of wine all to myself. I know you can tell where this is going. After several large glasses, I decided to cook myself some late supper, but as I walked into the kitchen, there on the dining table was the book. The Harry Potter book. I actually couldn't take my eyes off it, thinking, you've ruined everything, you have, you book. And the more I stared, the more my hate for this book overcame me. A little devil on my shoulder reminded me of Jim's prank. I sort of danced over to the book and gave it one last stare before picking it up, opening it, and I can barely read these words, tearing out the last 10 pages of the last ever Harry Potter book. This filled me with the kind of joy and happiness I hadn't felt for a couple of weeks, says sad Mark, and I went to bed with a spring in my step. The next morning, my wife woke up and was a new woman. She'd obviously given a lot of thought to the strong words I'd used in our argument. She even cooked me breakfast, told me she loved me and apologised for the neglect she'd shown in previous weeks. A week or so had passed when one night my wife said to me, not long now and the book is finished. I kissed her on the head and went to bed early, leaving her downstairs with a bottle of wine and the book. There's a lot of wine in this story. I set my alarm and nodded off to what was a pleasant sleep, right up until the moment that I was awoken by, in capital letters, a scream from downstairs. I ran down thinking my darling wife was being attacked or had had an accident. When I got there, she was crying and she could barely speak. What's wrong? I asked, but only a mumbling noise came from her mouth. I gave her a glass of water. She composed herself. Then this look of pure evil on her face with a glare like I had never seen. She shouted at me, "The back pages have gone from my book! Who could have done this?" As the consequences of my foolish actions hit home and panic set in, I said what had to be said. "Well, Jim must have done it," I said, obviously. "He did the same thing to Rosie, and it was him who sold you the book, if you remember, so that's the only logical explanation." At this point, my wife looked at me with a glare like I had never seen, and for a brief moment I even thought I saw horns growing on either side of her head. "I want to see him. Fetch the car. We're going to work right now to get him." I couldn't believe the hole I'd dug myself, but I didn't argue, and before long we were at the shop. My wife burst through the doors, went straight up to Jim and said, and I'm paraphrasing here, "What have you bloomin' well done?" Jim looked blankly, but my wife continued, "You know what you've done, you evil man? The same as you did to Rosie's book, except mine's a limited edition and signed by the cast of the films." The enormity of what I'd done hit me like a ton of bricks as my wife broke down in tears. And then, to make matters worse, Rosie got in on the act. "Jim," she said, "how could you do this? You horrid man, you're in the spare room tonight."
Good impression.
Thank you very much. I got a little carried away. Poor Jim tried to protest his innocence, but no one was listening because he'd done it before. He had previous. And before long, I took my sobbing wife home as a shop full of customers gave Jim the evil eye. Well, it's now been over 10 years, and I'm ashamed to admit I still haven't revealed the truth until now. And my wife has never uttered another word to Jim since then.
No way.
In 10 years.
Oh, my gosh.
I therefore seek forgiveness for being such a wimp and for committing such a heinous act in the first place. Well, that's why I said no forgiveness on a whole bunch of levels. First of all, you never ever desecrate a book like that. How callous and evil and rotten and terrible. And your wife thinks it's Jim that's done it, and you haven't spoken for 10 years. Oh dear, Mark, I think the wrath of the nation is coming your way via Joe Wiley, first of all.
Not no way, not no how. This is never ever going to be forgiven on any level whatsoever. The self-pity, though, in the way this was written, and the way he was sarcastically saying, "my darling wife," all the way through. I mean, just ridiculous. And for poor Jim, in fact, he ruined the whole relationship. I can relate to this because I'm a massive Harry Potter fan myself, and with this book we went on holiday, and I was accused also of neglecting my entire family. And I remember being in the swimming pool and reading the last 5, 6, 7 pages and just sobbing. My tears were just kind of pouring into the pool. Yeah,
we went to the day after this one came out. My family went away with 4 other families, and 3/4 of us had exactly the same book, and the deal was if anyone gives anything away, you have to carry the other person's luggage. That's the deal. That's
it's a really big deal.
It's
so no way could you be forgiven, Mark.
Yes, exactly.
Well, my confession is I've never seen or read Harry Potter, so there you go. So I don't have a vested interest. However, I would say I kind of understand Mark's resentment when they're at the party. You're giving me the you've never read a Harry Potter
Bobby.
book. I understand how Mark felt, though. You know, she's at a party. That's not very fair, disappearing with your book.
Yeah, but how fantastic to retreat to a treehouse when there's a party going on and it's just you and a Harry Potter book in a treehouse.
But Mark's left at the party on his own. That's what's not fair. So
Mark.
I kind of understand where he's going from. Having said that, he had plenty of chances when she woke up in the morning and said, "Look, the error of my ways." She could have given he could have given the pages back then. But you're right. The biggest problem is the fact that he blames someone else, and that friendship has been ruined for 10 years. Mark, I'd be surprised if you're still married after this.
So what's going to happen now?
Yeah, there's a second part to this. So let us know.
He vandalised the book, and his mate Jim vandalised the book, so he doesn't get any sympathy either.
But not this book.